In March of 1852, the body of a wealthy merchant was found floating in Bayou St. John. His eyes had been replaced with glass beads, his mouth was sewn shut with red thread, and carved into his chest were 7 words that sent terror through New Orleans high society. "She sees you, she knows. 7 more." Within the week, 6 more bodies appeared across the city, each bearing the same marks, each connected to a single name that had been whispered in the shadows of Congo Square for 3 months. A name that appeared in no census, no bill of sale, no church record: Celeste. The New Orleans Daily Crescent published its first account on March 12, 1852, though the reporter, Mr. Edmund Whitmore, had been investigating the matter since late February. His private journal, discovered in 1923 during renovations of the old Crescent building, provides the most detailed record of what he called the most disturbing sequence of events I have witnessed in 20 years of journalism. Whitmore's investigation began when he attended a dinner party at the home of cotton factor Mr. Harrison Bellamy. During the evening, Bellamy's wife collapsed, overcome with what doctors initially diagnosed as nervous hysteria. What drew Whitmore's attention was not the collapse itself, but what Mrs. Bellamy said as she was carried upstairs. Over and over, she repeated, "The beautiful one is watching. She counts us in the mirror. 7 more souls before she rests." The merchant who had become the first victim, Mr. Laurent Dubose, had been at that same dinner party. According to Whitmore's notes, Dubose left early, complaining of a headache. His body was discovered 2 days later. The coroner's report, filed by Dr. Auguste Mercier, described wounds that made no medical sense. The glass beads inserted into the eye sockets were of a specific type used in voodoo rituals, each containing a drop of what analysis later confirmed to be human blood. The red thread used to sew the mouth shut was cotton, hand-spun, containing traces of graveyard dirt and herbs associated with silencing spells. But it was the carving on the chest that troubled Dr. Mercier most. The words had been cut with precision, almost surgical, yet Dubose had been alive when the cutting began. The cause of death was listed as heart failure brought on by extreme terror. Whitmore's journal from March 14th records his first interview with a woman named Philomene, a free person of color who ran a boarding house on Dauphine Street. She had agreed to meet him only after he promised anonymity. Her account was the first to mention Celeste by name. "Monsieur Whitmore, there are things that happen in this city that your newspapers will never print," Philomene told him. 3 months ago, in December, a merchant ship arrived from Charleston carrying a cargo of people. 87 souls. Among them was a woman so beautiful that grown men wept when they saw her. The traders called her Celeste, though that was not her true name. By the time the auction began at the St. Louis Hotel, every wealthy man in the city had heard of her. The auction records from December 17, 1851, held in the notarial archives, confirm the arrival of the ship Philomene described. However, there is no listing for anyone matching Celeste's description. Instead, there is a gap in the auction ledger, where 3 pages have been carefully removed. The notation in the margin, written in a different hand, reads only, "Private sale. Do not record." What happened next comes from multiple sources, each corroborating the others in disturbing detail. 7 men, all prominent members of New Orleans society, had pooled their resources to purchase Celeste in a private transaction. The amount, according to a letter found among Harrison Bellamy's papers, was unprecedented: $8,000, more than 4 times the price of a skilled tradesman. But the consortium had a specific purpose in mind. They intended to present Celeste at what was euphemistically called a private gathering at the Globe Ballroom on Basin Street. These gatherings, thinly veiled as social events, were places where wealthy white men came to form arrangements with women of color. However, Celeste was not a free woman. She was enslaved. And what the 7 men planned was not an arrangement but a spectacle of their power and wealth. A diary entry from a German immigrant named Klaus Hoffmann who worked as a groundskeeper at the Globe Ballroom, provides a witness account of January 15, 1852. Hoffman wrote in his native language, and his words were not translated until the 1940s. Tonight, I witnessed something that has shaken my faith in humanity. A woman was brought to the ballroom in chains. She was dressed in fine silk, her hair adorned with jewels, but her wrists and ankles bore iron. The gentleman who brought her spoke of her as one might speak of a prized horse. They had invited others to witness what they called the most beautiful creature in the South. But this woman, this Celeste, she did not weep. She did not beg. Instead, she looked at each man present with eyes that seemed to pierce their very souls, and she spoke words in a language I did not recognize. The temperature in the room dropped. Candles flickered. One gentleman fainted. I fled the ballroom and did not return until morning. What Hoffman could not have known was that the words Celeste spoke were in Kikongo, a language spoken in Central Africa. Years later, a linguistic analysis conducted by researchers at Tulane University identified the phrase. It translated roughly to, "Your names are written in blood, 7 days, 7 deaths, 7 passages to judgment." The men who had brought Celeste to the Globe Ballroom laughed at her words. According to another witness, a musician named Jean-Baptiste Lavergne, who performed at the event, one of the consortium members, a sugar planter named Etienne Marchand, responded, "The wench speaks in tongues, how delightfully savage." Lavergne's statement to authorities weeks later included a detail that investigators initially dismissed. He reported that when Marchand touched Celeste's shoulder, she turned her head slowly and smiled. "It was not the smile of a person," Lavergne stated. "It was the smile of something else wearing a person's face." The gathering ended abruptly when Celeste collapsed. The consortium had her removed to a property on Rampart Street, a house used for purposes that polite society did not acknowledge. A physician, Dr. Charles Fontaine, was summoned. His medical notes from January 16th describe a patient in a state of what he called profound disconnection from reality. But one line in his note stands out. Patient's pupils remain fully dilated even in bright light. Temperature is abnormally low, 94 degrees. Pulse is present but irregular, as if the heart is confused about its purpose. For 6 weeks, Celeste remained at the Rampart Street house. During this time, according to testimony from a washerwoman named Suzette, who worked at the property, strange things occurred. Mirrors would crack in the middle of the night. Birds would fly into windows. The 7 men who owned Celeste began receiving visitors. Not living visitors, but shadows that appeared in their homes, standing in corners, watching from doorways. A letter from Harrison Bellamy to his brother in Mobile, dated February 28th, reveals the growing terror. "I cannot explain what is happening. Each night I see her standing at the foot of my bed. Not the actual woman, but her image, as clear as day. She does not speak. She simply stares and counts. Each night she raises one more finger. Last night she raised 7. I fear what comes when she stops counting." The medical examiner's file on Laurent Dubose, the first victim found in Bayou St. John, notes that Dubose had visited the Rampart Street property on February 27th, just hours before his disappearance. A receipt found in his pocket indicated he had purchased red candles and a black rooster from a shop on St. Philip Street, items commonly associated with counter-voodoo rituals. By mid-March, the remaining 6 members of the consortium were in a state of panic. According to Edmund Whitmore's journal, he interviewed Etienne Marchand on March 15th. Marchand was nearly incoherent with fear. "She has marked us," he told Whitmore. "Each of us bears her mark. In the mirror, we see it. The number 7, written on our foreheads in blood that only we can see." Whitmore pressed for details about Celeste's current whereabouts. Marchand's response chilled him. "She is gone. She was there one morning, and by afternoon the room was empty. The door was locked from the inside. The windows were barred. But she was simply gone, and that is when the deaths began." The second body appeared on March 16th. Etienne Marchand was found in his study at his plantation downriver. Like Dubose, his eyes had been replaced with glass beads, his mouth sewn shut. The carving on his chest read, "She sees you, she knows, 6 more." Over the next 12 days, 4 more bodies appeared. Each victim was a member of the original consortium. Each bore identical marks. The city descended into fear. The Daily Crescent published carefully worded articles about a series of unfortunate deaths, but avoided mentioning the connections between the victims. Meanwhile, something else was happening in the enslaved quarters across the city. Multiple plantation journals from this period mention unusual behavior. Enslaved people were heard singing songs in African languages at night, singing that had been forbidden for decades under threat of severe punishment. But the overseers who tried to stop it found themselves unable to approach. Some reported feeling an invisible force pushing them back. Others spoke of seeing a beautiful woman standing among the singers, though no one could identify who she was. A particularly detailed account comes from the journal of Matthias Schroeder, a German immigrant who owned a small dairy farm in Carrollton. On March 24th, he wrote, "Last night, the Negroes on the neighboring plantation were singing. I walked to the property line to listen, and I saw something that defied understanding. In the center of the gathering stood a woman of remarkable beauty. She wore white, and her hands were raised to the sky. The enslaved people around her were not afraid. They were celebrating. And as I watched, she turned and looked directly at me. Her eyes were completely white, no pupils at all. She nodded once, and I understood. Whatever justice she sought, it was not meant for men like me. I returned home and bolted my door." On March 27th, the 6th body appeared. A cotton merchant named Jules Fortier was found dead in a warehouse on Chupitula Street. The same marks. The same message, now reading, "She sees you, she knows, 1 more." Harrison Bellamy, the only remaining member of the original consortium, barricaded himself in his home. According to a statement from his wife, he spent days trying to complete counter-rituals he had learned from a root doctor on Perdido Street. His study was filled with candles, protective herbs, and drawn vives meant to ward off evil spirits. Edmund Whitmore's final journal entry regarding the case is dated March 31st, 1852. He had been granted permission by the police to interview Bellamy under protective custody. What follows is Whitmore's direct transcription of that interview. Mr. Bellamy's hands trembled as he spoke. His eyes were bloodshot, ringed with dark circles. He had not slept in days. "She was never just a woman," Bellamy told me. "We thought we were purchasing property, but she was something else, something that had been waiting. When she spoke those words at the Globe, she was not cursing us. She was simply telling us what would happen. We had 7 days from that night, but we did not believe. We laughed." I asked him about Celeste's disappearance from the Rampart Street house. "She did not disappear," he said. "She was never there. Not really. What we brought to that house was a shell. The real Celeste, whatever she truly was, had already begun her work. Every night she visits me, not in dreams, in waking. She stands beside my bed and she counts. Tonight, she will reach 7, and I will be the last." I attempted to reassure him, but he interrupted me. "You do not understand, Mr. Whitmore. This is not about voodoo. This is not about curses. This is about justice. We took a woman and treated her as less than human. We paraded her like an animal. We planned to use her, break her, destroy whatever humanity remained in her. But she was not powerless. She was never powerless. And now we pay the price." Whitmore left Bellamy's home at 4 p.m. on March 31st. At 6 p.m., Bellamy's butler discovered his employer dead in the locked study. Glass beads in the eye sockets, red thread through the lips, and on the chest, carved with that same impossible precision. "She sees you. She knows. It is finished." The 7 deaths ended that night. No more bodies appeared with the mysterious markings. The Daily Crescent published a final article on April 3rd, attributing the deaths to a disturbed individual who has since departed the city. The case was officially closed by the police on April 15th. But the story did not end. In May of 1852, ship's logs from vessels departing New Orleans record an unusual passenger. Multiple captains noted a woman of exceptional beauty who booked passage under various names. She always paid in gold coins of uncertain origin. She always traveled alone. And she always departed before the ship reached its destination, vanishing from locked cabins in the middle of the night. More troubling are the reports that began appearing in newspapers from Mobile, Charleston, Savannah, and Richmond over the following months. Accounts of mysterious deaths. Wealthy men involved in the slave trade found dead with glass beads in their eye sockets, red thread through their lips, and carved messages about judgment and justice. Edmund Whitmore's last mention of the case appears in a letter to his sister dated July 1852. I have spoken with colleagues in other cities. They describe deaths identical to those we witnessed here. The methods, the markings, all the same. It is as if something has been unleashed, moving from city to city, exacting a toll from those who profit from human suffering. I do not know if Celeste was a woman, a spirit, or something between. But I know this. There are debts that cannot be escaped, and justice that cannot be denied. The Rampart Street house where Celeste had been held was torn down in 1853. Workers reported strange occurrences during demolition. Tools would disappear. Nails would bend themselves. On the final day of demolition, as the last wall came down, workers discovered something that was not reported to authorities, but was recorded in a foreman's private diary. Buried beneath the floorboards of the room where Celeste had been kept was a small bundle wrapped in white cloth. Inside were 7 crude dolls, each made of cotton and Spanish moss. Each doll had pins through its eyes. Each had red thread around its throat, and each was labeled with one of the 7 names: Laurent Dubose, Etienne Marchand, Jules Fortier, Harrison Bellamy, and 3 others. But there was an 8th doll in the bundle. This one was different. It had no pins, no thread. Instead, it was carefully crafted, beautiful, dressed in white. And across its chest, sewn in careful stitches, were words in French: Liberté par la mort, justice par le sang, freedom through death, justice through blood. The bundle and its contents were burned by the foreman, who refused to speak of them again. In 1934, during the construction of a new municipal building on Basin Street, workers uncovered a mass grave. The remains of over 200 individuals were discovered, most showing signs of malnutrition, disease, and physical trauma. Forensic analysis determined they dated from the 1840s and 1850s. Among the remains was one that stood out: a woman, approximately 25 to 30 years old at time of death. What made her remarkable was what was found buried with her: 7 glass beads, identical to those described in the 1852 death reports, a spool of red cotton thread, and a small silver locket that, when opened, contained a single lock of hair and a piece of paper with 7 names written in careful script. The names matched the 7 members of the consortium. The remains were reburied in an unmarked location at the insistence of several prominent New Orleans families who claimed to be descendants of those involved in the case. The artifacts were turned over to the Louisiana Historical Society, where they were cataloged and stored. In 1956, the storage room where they were kept burned in a mysterious fire. The official cause was listed as electrical malfunction, though the building was only 10 years old and had modern wiring. The only surviving photograph of the artifacts, taken in 1935, shows the items arranged on a table. In the background of the photograph, clearly visible in a mirror hanging on the wall, is a reflection that should not be there. A woman in white standing behind the photographer. Her hands are raised. She appears to be counting. In 2019, the New Orleans Historic Voodoo Museum received an anonymous donation: a wooden box, aged and water-damaged, containing documents related to the 1852 deaths. Among them was a final page from Edmund Whitmore's journal, one that had not been discovered in 1923. The entry is dated September 1852 and reads, "I have decided not to publish what I learned about Celeste. The truth would destroy families, collapse fortunes, and challenge the very foundation of society as we know it. But I will record it here, sealed in this box, to be found when times have changed enough to receive it. Celeste was real. She was brought from Charleston, purchased by 7 men, and subjected to horrors I cannot bring myself to detail. But she was not alone. There were others, women and men who had studied the old ways, who had kept the knowledge of their ancestors alive despite every attempt to crush it out of them. On the night of January 15th, at the Globe Ballroom, Celeste did not curse the 7 men. She called to something older than curse, older than this city, older than the ships that brought her ancestors here in chains. She called to a force that I can only describe as the accumulated weight of suffering, given form and purpose. What happened in New Orleans in 1852 was not the action of a single person. It was the response of something far larger. The deaths of those 7 men were not revenge. They were a message. To all who profit from the trade in human flesh, you are seen, you are known, and judgment, however delayed, is inevitable. I have nightmares still about that night in Bellamy's study, not because of what he told me, but because of what I saw as I left. In the hallway mirror, standing behind me, was Celeste. She was smiling. And she was not alone. Behind her stood others, dozens, hundreds, an endless line stretching back into darkness, all of them watching, all of them waiting. I pray this box is never opened. But if it is, know this. Some debts span generations, some justice cannot be denied, and some secrets are better left buried. The museum curator who opened the box reported that the documents had an unusual property. They were ice cold to the touch, despite being stored in a climate-controlled environment. And late at night, when the museum is closed and empty, security cameras sometimes capture something unusual. A woman in white, walking through the exhibits, standing before the displays about slavery, about the slave trade, about the human cost of New Orleans prosperity. She does not disturb anything. She does not interact with the physical world. She simply stands and watches and counts. On 7 nights each year, around the anniversary of those deaths in 1852, people walking past the old Globe Ballroom location on Basin Street report seeing lights in windows of buildings that have been empty for decades. They hear singing in African languages, and if they look carefully at the shadows on the walls, they see silhouettes, a woman with her hands raised, and behind her, countless others standing in silent witness. The police receive calls. They investigate. They find nothing, just empty buildings and shadows. But the reports never stop coming, because some stories don't end when the bodies are buried. Some voices continue to speak long after the mouths have been sewn shut. And some beauty, weaponized by desperation and faith and rage, becomes something that transcends death itself. In 2023, a historical marker was placed near the site of the old St. Louis Hotel, where the auction would have occurred. It reads, "In remembrance of the countless souls bought and sold on this ground. Their names are forgotten, their stories are lost, but their presence remains." Local residents report that the marker is often found decorated with offerings, glass beads, red thread, white cloth, and sometimes, on certain mornings, there are 7 fresh roses, carefully arranged. No one knows who leaves them. But in the French Quarter, among those who know the old stories, there is a saying, "Celeste is still watching, she's still counting, and the debt is still being paid." Last year, a prominent art collector from New York purchased a plantation home outside New Orleans, planning to convert it into a luxury resort. The project was abandoned after 3 months when 7 construction workers simultaneously quit, all reporting the same experience. A woman in white standing in the fields at dawn, watching them work. When they approached her, she would raise her hands and count on her fingers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then she would smile. The property remains empty. The for sale sign has been up for 8 months. No one has made an offer, because in New Orleans, some ground is too stained by history to ever be truly clean. Some echoes are too loud to ever be silenced, and some debts can never, ever be forgotten.